Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things, embrace your neurodivergence, learn tips and tricks to function optimally, and love yourself, neurodivergence and all. Welcome to the Self Loved Woman podcast. Hey, it's Jen. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're going to talk about something that I don't really talk about as much, but it's an equally valid experience of ADHD. And I want to give voice to it and perhaps share some ideas of how to navigate it if this is your experience. So, you've heard me talk a lot about masking through overachievement and high functioning, mostly because that's how I did it. Right. And not like I was this brilliant child that was like intentional about that choice. It was just what I figured out to do in the circumstances I had with the inner and outer resources I had available. Right. And not everyone has the same experience. Not everyone can have the same experience. And so I want to talk about people who didn't mask through overfunctioning and high achievement for whatever reason. And there could be a lot of reasons that didn't happen. The one that I see most often, because I do a lot of work with trauma and in my private practice, I specialize in complex trauma in women, many of whom have ADHD because I attract people with ADHD to me. Like moths to a flame, we all kind of hang out with each other, don't we? I didn't even know I was doing it, by the way. But anyway, I notice how trauma, complex trauma, especially that repeated, regular traumatic experience in your growing up world can impact your ability to function with ADHD in a way that maybe other people could because perhaps they had a loving family or one supportive person in their life who gave a shit, right? Kind of took them under their wing. And in my case, I had a really loving family. My mom was particularly supportive and loving, and she didn't know I had ADHD. And certainly, I mean, it was still the 80s. Some of the language she used wasn't necessarily beneficial, definitely some shaming, but she was very interested in helping me figure out whatever was making me be so disorganized and forgetful and messy and, I mean, quote unquote messy, right? Like, made sense to me. But not everyone had those things. And in fact, some people grew up, and maybe this is you, being scared in your home. Maybe you didn't feel safe there, or maybe you didn't feel safe outside of your home, or maybe both. So when that happens, being able to have the wherewithal to try extra hard in school or wherever else you were trying to do things may not have been an option for you. Because the thing is with ADHD, it can be really hard to motivate ourselves to do things that are uninteresting. It can be really hard to motivate ourselves for things based on rewards and consequences, which is kind of what grades are. And then the threat of what would happen if we got bad grades, right? Oftentimes, the longer term threat of not getting to go to college. I don't know if that was a threat you got, but I know a lot of the people that I know had that when maybe ADHD wasn't even, let me say that again, maybe when college wasn't even an option given your ADHD or something you were even interested in. So those ways of motivating you with ADHD, I mean, if you were over functioning and high achieving, yeah, you might have hacked your way through. I know I did. I found my way through being able to do that, but my gosh, was it draining. It took so much time and energy and definitely negatively impacted my social connections and even my ability to pick up on social cues because all of my energy was going into being able to do the school stuff that I found boring so that I could get good grades. And none of my energy went into trying to figure out the subtle social cues of adolescence, which didn't really go well for me. Right. So you might have had that experience and you're like, oh, Jen, I know. However, if you were not one of the people that did the overfunctioning and high achieving, there's no shame in that. And that's really important to say, because a lot of times I hear these women talk about, oh, I'm an underachiever. And it breaks my heart because I believe 100% that you got up every day, no matter what kind of ADHD you have, even if you don't have ADHD, I believe that you got up every day and did the absolute best you knew how to do in the circumstances you were in with the internal and external resources you had at the time. You did your best. You did your best. And that's all anyone can ask. It doesn't make any sense to have expected yourself to have done any differently than you did. You were a child. So I want to talk a little bit about this. And if you're like, I don't know, maybe I'm an underachiever, to be clear, I'm not using the word underachiever because I think you achieved what you could given your circumstances and resources at the time. And a lot of times you probably got called an underachiever. Maybe you were told you weren't living up to your potential if you would just focus and try harder and apply yourself, maybe those kind of things. Or maybe you got really good grades doing very little work in elementary school, maybe even part of middle school. And then it caught up with you because there were some things that maybe you didn't learn, but you were really good at passing tests and doing enough homework to get good grades. But then it caught up with you and you started to struggle in school and it wasn't fun and it was even more boring because maybe now, not having spent a ton of time learning and studying when you were younger, there were things that didn't make sense and you might have felt like you were in over your head. And that's not bad or wrong. It's just one of the many paths that people take with ADHD. You might have even been like super bored with school, and perhaps you found ways to self-medicate to make your life more interesting. Like maybe you experimented with drugs and alcohol or smoking or whatever you did. Maybe you got into like, I know some kids nowadays, they do these like high doses of caffeine and things like that, which doesn't sound terrible, but the amount that they're taking is pretty intense and definitely not helping sleep and long-term health and blah, blah, blah. Not that anyone is thinking about that when they're a child or adolescent. It's just that sometimes that's how people with ADHD self-medicate. And you might have had a crap ton of fun. Certainly I didn't have fun, not much. Like I had glimmers of fun, but most of my life was focused on doing well in school, especially once I hit like maybe seventh, eighth grade, but especially once I hit high school. It was like all my free time went to that. But if you're someone who feels like you quote unquote didn't meet up to your potential, whatever that means, or you're quote unquote an underachiever, again, whatever that means, then maybe you had like a crap ton of fun. And that's cool because it's all like, it is what it is. We did what we knew how to do at the time. And so I just want to say, if you are someone who's been called an overachiever, underachiever, if you've been called an underachiever or told that you weren't meeting your potential, I just want to say that, first of all, that sucks. That sucks. That is how people treated you and spoke to you because that's painful. And a lot of times there's kind of an underlying shaming message beneath it about like, well, you'd do better if you cared, or just like this kind of you're not good enough. And I don't think that has anything to do with it. I don't think your worth has anything to do with what you did or didn't do with your ADHD or as a child. We all are born worthy and we are all always worthy. And I get that some of this might be hard to hear. Like when you hear me say, I believe with my whole heart and soul, 100%, you got up every day and did the absolute best you knew how to do at the time, given your circumstances and your internal and external resources, you might notice something inside of you that says, no, I'm a loser, right? And I'm not calling you one. To be clear, I've heard people say this to me over the years, that they believe that narrative, that because they were an underachiever, they're somehow a loser or not good enough. And I don't find the word underachiever useful. I don't find that whole narrative useful. All it does is further the shame and crap feelings about yourself. So it's going to make it harder for you to enjoy life and do what you can do now, do what you want to do now. And if you're listening to this, you're probably an ADHD woman entrepreneur and you have some pretty big things that you're wanting to do. But this narrative of, I'm an underachiever, I didn't try hard enough, I didn't meet my full potential. Maybe I'm still not meeting my full potential. That could be it too, right? Or I'm a loser, like whatever those things are, that narrative is not helping you in your business. It is pretty hard to get yourself out there in the world when you're an entrepreneur with your business. And that narrative, having parts of you say that so loudly inside of yourself is just going to make it so much harder, maybe even impossible until you deal with it. And so I just want to name like these parts of you that say that while that narrative isn't helpful, they're trying to help you. They are trying to help you. Whatever is inside of you with those narratives about being underachieving or whatever words you have in your own repertoire that you use, likely to beat yourself up, that is not accurate, first of all, but it's also likely done to protect you in some way. I want you to think about it. What happens if you believe that you're incapable, you can't meet up to your true talent or abilities, that you're an underachiever, or maybe even that you're a loser? What happens when you believe that? In my mind and what I witness in my experience, what I witness in my clients and both in my private practice and coaching clients, is that then you're like, oh, well, I don't have to try as hard. Or, you really don't put yourself out there as much. It's less of a risk. And when you don't put yourself out there as much, then you're not exposing yourself to possible quote unquote failure, which we can talk about that word all day because I disagree with the way that most people think about it. Right. But by protecting you in this way, you don't have to deal with things not going as intended or other people's judgment and criticism. Maybe even you're avoiding the feeling of, like perhaps you wasted your time because it didn't work. And I want to talk about that because failure is a tricky word. People toss it around and mean all kind of things. I don't even like the word failure because so many people have such a negative connotation with it. What I prefer is when things don't go the way we intended. And that's really different because when things don't go the way we intended, we learn something. If you've been listening to my podcast for a while, you've been in my circle, you know that I started out as an actuarial analyst. I didn't pass all the exams, but I was an actuarial analyst, and you have to take these really hard exams. They pass like 28% of the people each time around, and most people are taking it for the second and third time. I mean, this was back in my day, back in the mid 90s. I don't know what it's like now. I know it's changed, but that was the deal. And so, yeah, I failed. I failed exam 150 life contingency 3 times. And in this transition period that was happening, things were not going to go well for me in terms of how many of my exams would count towards the new system. And so while anxious and depressed, was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this. I can't lose those exams and have to take a bunch of stuff over again. And I hate that all I'm doing is studying and working and exercising. I may never gave that up. I was really emotionally unhealthy. And some might say I failed when I quit my actuarial career. I know at the time I certainly felt like I did. And looking back, I look at that and say, what I thought was a huge failure in my life, I look at that and say, my goodness, that is one of the best damn lessons I ever had in my life. That gave me so many opportunities to learn and grow. And not just in my career. You could probably see I did a complete 180 because now I'm a social worker. Although I am helping entrepreneurs. So I still got that business lens in there and I own 2 businesses. So nothing that we do is useless. Nothing is wasted because we can learn and grow from things. So even when things don't go as intended, and if you like the word failure, even when you fail, It's not wasted time. It's all learning and growth. My math degree, believe it or not, I use it every damn day. Sure, I'm not like integrating things or doing multivariate calculus and proofs and stuff, but I am using those problem solving abilities that I learned in my math program. I'm learning the business skills that I learned my first 2 years in college when I was an accounting major. I'm using what I learned my nearly 4 years as an actuarial analyst in the business world. And sure, maybe your story's different, but I bet if you look at the things that maybe you have thought are failures or times when you've quote unquote underachieved, whatever that means, there's some life lessons there if you haven't already found them. So none of that time was wasted. And if what's keeping you from going forward in your business is that you're afraid of wasting time or failing or being criticized, I'm going to tell you a couple things. Number one, things aren't going to go as planned. It's just not going to happen. Not everything can go as planned 100% of the time, especially when you're an entrepreneur, because most things are testing. You're testing out different things. You're like, oh, let's see what happens when I do this. Oh, do people enjoy this kind of a launch? Do they enjoy my product this way or this way? Do they enjoy, I don't know, on social media, do they enjoy reels or statics more? Right? I don't know if that's what it's actually all called, by the way. That's just what I call it. So don't quote me. Social media expert is not in my background, although I'm learning for sure. But everything is learning, everything is testing. And if we get tripped up over that word failure, then that's not useful. And you can use the word failure just so long. I mean, you can do whatever you want, really. I'm not here to tell you what to do with your life. But if you're wanting to be able to grow your business, you can use the word failure just so long as you're not tying your self-worth into it. It's more about the thing failed, not you failed. Whatever you tried failed. Again, I like didn't work or didn't go as planned or didn't go as I hoped, right? Oh, okay, I learned that didn't go well. Whoop, nope, not that one, you know? And then we refine and we figure it out. And that's what it is to be an entrepreneur a lot of times, which can be a little scary at first for people who have ADHD and are trying to avoid further criticism and judgment because you've heard me talk about it. We all got so much extra criticism, correction, and negative feedback over our non-ADHD peers that a lot of us have trauma just from that. Even if we had these like lovely homes with two parents who loved us and spent time with us. And like my dad coached my softball team and my mom was my campfire leader. And she worked only really part time till I was fully in school and my sister was fully in school. Not everyone has that. And I'm super grateful for it. But I also know that is what allowed me to do the things I was able to do. So I want you to cut yourself some slack. And I advise you to take some time to check out the narrative in your head. Are you calling yourself an underachiever? Are you shaming yourself? Do you think of yourself as a loser? Because I don't think you're a loser. I think you just did what you did because that's what you knew with what you had. I want to name another piece of this, and it's the grief of it. If you are someone who was called an underachiever, who maybe didn't go to as much school as you wanted to or thought you should or whatever, when you look at other people with ADHD or not, and you compare yourself to them, never great because comparison is the thief of joy, but we all do it. But if we don't catch ourselves, when you're comparing yourself to people, there may be grief there. Like, oh, how come I couldn't go to college like they did? Or maybe there were like logistical financial things, but maybe it was even having the wherewithal. Not that college is the end all be all. By the way, I've totally changed my opinion on that. I used to be hardcore, like academics are the most important thing in the world, which I mean, of course I did because I loved school and spent most of my time on it. So why wouldn't I have said that in the past? But I will tell you now that I actually don't think a 4-year degree is the best way for everyone. I think there's some people that's a great choice. And I think there's a lot of other people who can find other ways to find meaningful work for which they're well paid and can support themselves if they want that. That doesn't require going to school for 4 years and likely creating mountains and mountains of debt. You may feel grief about it though. even though what you did is what worked out for you well enough to get you where you are now. There might be grief there. You might have regret. And it might take some working through of that. Not because you're less than, not because you should have done different, because you wanted to have done different. And there may be some grief and loss there now, because now you can't. You can't go back. And that can feel heavy and hard. And another thing that can get you wrapped up and stuck from doing what you need to do in your business. The thing about grief is it takes active mourning. Mourning, mourning, active grieving, active mourning. It takes us acknowledging that it's there and letting ourselves feel the feelings, like sitting there and feeling them. And you might have a part inside of you that goes, oh no, we're not going to do that. Right. And if you don't have a lot of experience sitting with your feelings and you don't have a therapist or a coach like me who has experience with helping people navigate those roads, then you may want to get one because it can be overwhelming if you're not used to feeling your feelings. And it can be really helpful to feel your feelings. It can be helpful to move them through. And maybe you do it through movement. Maybe you feel your feelings. I used to go to yoga classes publicly. Now I mostly practice in my home, like by my own self. But sometimes people would cry on their mat and you could tell they were just working through feelings. That happened to me after my mom died. Not a lot before that, but I spend a lot of time sitting with my feelings at home. But I'm a therapist, so that kind of, I'm more likely to have done that. It's just there's a lot of ways that you can work through your feelings, whether it's grief or regret, or you might even feel shame. And shame's a tricky one. Shame loves secrecy. Shame loves secrecy. And Brene Brown introduced us to that. She's a shame researcher. She's done some amazing stuff on vulnerability and her books are amazing. Heard of Brene Brown or checked her out yet? I highly recommend you check out her TED Talks. She's got 2 TED Talks and then she's got a Netflix documentary. I highly recommend you check those out. If you're going to read one of her books and you haven't read any, I recommend starting with The Gifts of Imperfection because that touches on the shame piece and the vulnerability piece. There's lots of ways to do this work, and sometimes it can be really heavy, and you can benefit from working with someone one-to-one. In my one-to-one coaching, I can help you work through this because I can do IFS in my one-to-one coaching, which is internal family systems, working with the parts of you who hold this. So if that is something you're interested in doing, I'll put a link to the application for one-to-one coaching with me in the show notes. And if I have time in my schedule, right? Because if everyone's like, yes, me, I only have so many hours in the day and I'll take however many I can. And at the same time, I want to do good work. So if that interests you, you're welcome to do that. Or you might find another way, someone else in your community who can support you in this. But whatever it is, if you're noticing big piles of shame and grief and regret, yeah, you can work with the parts of you who are pushing you down and do some of that. But a lot of times those are such big feelings, it can require additional assistance. All right, y'all. It has been nice to connect with you, even though it's kind of over a heavy topic. I'm always happy to hold space for you. And if you found something useful about this and think someone else might also, please share. And I'd love it if you'd follow this podcast, The Self-Loved Woman Way. Take care, and I'll catch you next time.